Anyone in business, you don't want to miss this. Mastering sales and growth from small business to very big wins. Chris Carey delivers a whole lot in this episode of Biz Bites. Check out some of the excerpts before we get into the show. I found it really interesting that people don't spend the time in checking what their own things are online. I had a meeting yesterday with a company, and they actually sent me a link to view something. And there was one comment under this video which basically said they're like scammers.
These things just didn't exist, right? So you need to be shifting your mindset from the 20 years ago where your profile was the interactions you had with people were how people thought of you in business or in personal life. Today it's everywhere. And that's where, I say to my kids who are 18 and 20, like, just be really careful what you're posting up there, because that's going to live with you forever, right? It's in the cloud somewhere and it's not going anywhere.
Welcome to Biz Bites, brought to you by ComTogether, helping businesses like yours build their brand through telling amazing stories to engage and grow audiences on multiple platforms. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Biz Bites. And today we're going to talk all things about making businesses grow, a very different perspective on how that happens, a much more all-rounded perspective, with a view to how you do things in small business as well, with some big business ideas. And the man that's going to help us guide us through some of these ideas and give us a little bit about his background as well is Chris, and welcome from Growth Team Advisory. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, morning, Anthony. It's great to be here.
Chris, I've given a little bit of an introduction there, but I think it's better always for our guests to tell us a little bit more about the business from their perspective. How do you see it? What do you actually focus on?
Okay, so the Growth Team Advisory is an advisory firm, by the sound of the name, which I set up approximately 12 months ago. The idea of it is that we really want to help small to medium-sized businesses grow. So my background and some of the guys in the team that work with me, our background's all in growing businesses. So I've worked for very large multinational companies. I've worked for pre-IPO companies. I've worked for private equity. I've done a lot of different things. And in all of those, I've always had that lens of growth and sales and ensuring that organisations can grow in the right manner, but also be able to scale without driving that cost through the roof. And for smaller businesses, that's so important for them. So utilising modern tools from today to enable whoever is doing the selling to actually go out into the market and be able to do that faster and more efficiently and build really strong pipelines. And when I talk to executive leaders today, whether they be in bigger firms or smaller organisations, the pipeline is the big concern for everybody at the moment. It's so difficult to get that top in there. And once they get it in there, like you always talk to salespeople, they can close deals. They know how to do them. It's getting the first conversation happening and then moving it through the right stages to get that close.
I think it's a really interesting take. There's so many things I want to unpack with all of that, but let's start from the principle of the business itself, because I love the idea of the advisory style, because from what you and I have spoken about previously before we started this recording and in a previous conversation, is that it's really about the advisory is a bit more accessible than people would think, isn't it? Because it's not the traditional sort of consulting model in the same way, is it?
No, it's not. It really is coming in as a trusted advisor to the organisation and helping you along the way to deliver and reach those goals that you want to. So that's very different from consulting. I mean, consulting is another word that people use, but consultants tend to kind of go, here's a project, here's a fee, we'll get to the end of it and away we go. I'm myself and the people within my firm are about joining that journey with you and actually saying, well, look, today it looks like this, but we know that things happen in the market. Look at COVID. Everyone had to pivot completely 4 years ago to a different business model of engaging with people. You need to be able to cope with things like that. And if you've just got a real square box that says, here's all the scope of works I'm going to do for you and here's the cost of it, that is not partnering with somebody. Whereas advisory is coming in and saying, look, I've had a lot of experience. I've been in organisations that have had situations similar to the ones you're in today. I want to help you get through that.
Yeah, I think it's such an important differentiation because you're absolutely right, and I think consulting gets a bad name at the best of times anyway. But the idea of collaborating and being in there, and I think as well, as I understand it, you're a lot more accessible in terms of that advisory idea than perhaps what people think, because normally people would expect that that's a big business idea, that they bring advisors in at some hefty fee, often in boards and all those kinds of things as well. And this is much more accessible, isn't it, for small business?
Yeah, 100%, Anthony. It's much more easy because rather than saying, if you want to get people that have got the experience that I've got and the people in my team, you're paying a lot of money if you're going to employ them full time. Whereas what we're able to do from an advisory point of view is come in and do a small amount of time with you at a cost that you can actually bear within your business. But giving you, and let's just say if it was 1 day a week, every week for a month, right? The cost of that, what we can deliver in that 1 day of our 8 hours of time is far more than if you're going to put on somebody that's a sales leader that, I don't know, let's pick a number that you're paying $100,000 to. Our 1 day will probably deliver you more than their 5 to 10 days of work just because of the experience. So that actually, when you think about that, having access to people with, I've got 30 years sales experience, right? Getting access to that, and people in my team have got 20, 15, all at high levels, right? Getting access to that at a price point that's acceptable for your business, your ROI, your return on investment is massive. It truly is. And part of the things that we do as well is we talk about what ROI do you need to get to make this a worthwhile exercise. All right, well, here's what we need to do, but you, in partnership with us, there's things you're going to need to do to deliver that ROI as well.
And I think the important thing about that is not just the ROI, but the fact that it is a collaboration, as you said before. And I think that's an important differentiation, because definitely, I'm sure you've done it, I've done it in the past, where you do that sort of consulting style gig where you're going in for a project and someone's come and said, we want X and this is what you need to do to be able to deliver that. And, that's where if you're in a different situation where you're advising them and it's much more of a longer term relationship, isn't it? I mean, it changes, I gather, as the relationship builds.
Yeah, it does, and I think too, as the organisations we work with change as well. I mean, they grow through our help and through their own actions, but as they grow, their requirements are different as well. So you might be a very small company that's turning over, I don't know, $2-3 million. We help you to get to 5. Your organisational structure needs to be different. So maybe you need some advice in the human resources area. We've got people we can bring in to help with that. So it truly is that partnership. And the key to it, Anthony, is it's like a tap, right? If you only need a small amount, you can turn it on for a small amount. But if suddenly you go, wow, this is actually producing really good returns for me, I need to actually accelerate this, we're available to do more time with you to do that. Whereas a lot of the times you'll end up with a scope of work from a consultant that says it's 8 hours a week, here's the outcome. Anything outside that scope, I'm going to charge you more money for.
Yes, and there's a lot of grey areas when that comes into play as well, and so changing the way you approach that, I think, is huge, as well. And I guess that's the next question is what sort of small businesses are you working with them? Is there a particular area that you're focused on, or is this something that can work for a variety of businesses?
Oh, it can really work for a variety of businesses. I mean, myself and my team have got deep experience in financial service, professional services, finance, accounting, tech. I worked for HP, I worked for Dell, I worked for Canon. So there's a lot of deep experience we've got in different industries. But what you find is that the problem normally is the same problem, just with a different way of putting it together. And the solution to that problem is applicable across different industries. Sure, if you're dealing, B2C as opposed to B2B, it's probably a different way to go to market. But your solutions end up being very similar in the way you're going to go and execute those. Because sales is just a conversation, right? Like you and I are having right now. We have a conversation, we build up a rapport, there's a bit of trust that's built up. And once that trust is built up, you then can move to that next session of, you've got awareness. I'm now going to consider what you're offering, you're putting forward. And then if I trust you and I think the offering is right for me, I'll actually move to engaging you for that offering. And that's really that's a simple sales process. Awareness, consideration, acceptance. It's that simple, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Everybody does it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing as well. Is that bringing that big business idea to small business? I've heard it spoken about, and I'm sure everyone out there listening in small business has heard it spoken about. But the difference is actually making it real and actually making it work. And I think that's an important differentiation. I mean, having access to that sort of level of expertise in that particular way is, I think, a bit of a game changer to the way businesses can think about how they actually want to grow. Rather than chugging along and doing the same thing and hoping they're going to learn as they go.
Yeah, look, there's a bit of a saying that I certainly didn't invent this, but one that I've heard over my career many, many times, skill and will. And a lot of the times when you're dealing with entrepreneurs and small business, they've got the biggest will in the world, right? They want to get this thing done. They'll work as hard as they possibly can. But it's that skill element that they might be lacking in, not through their own fault, just because they haven't had that experience, that we can really come in and identify the skill gap and then help them to cover that, either through us teaching them what they need to do, or alternatively, it might be that they just need to hire somebody who's a little bit different to come in with that skill set and help them through that. And we'll assist them with that as well. So that skill and will thing is really important. I think also too, you sort of think about the difficulties that small business face today. It's no different than a large business that's trying to grow at 10, 15%, which is quite difficult for a large business to do because there's a lot more money they've got to bring in. But those smaller businesses have the same issues there. So for us to be able to stand in and go, here's our experience, here's the skills you're going to need, let's go and help you, because they've all got the will, or most of them anyway.
Yes. And but I suppose the flip side is also, it can also be true, can't it, that the small business, it's not about the will, as you say. It can sometimes be a lack of experience and lack of knowledge. But is there sometimes a gap? Do you have to change the way you think because of those bigger business ideas to make them more accessible in terms of small business? Because it's, obviously in a big business, there's lots of people and you can turn to, and you can do some things a lot quicker and a lot more easily. So if you're a small business and you might only have a handful of people, even bringing in an advisor isn't necessarily always going to give you that big business way of doing things. It may not be relevant to them. So do you find you have to adjust your thinking a little bit?
Yeah, you've got to adjust your thinking, and you've got to adjust that execution plan, because everyone, I look at some fantastic business plans, right? And they look fantastic, but it's that execution piece that always lets them down. And just an example, the other day I was working with a company that's put in a particular CRM system. Now, if I was in a big business, I would go and hire somebody that knows that CRM system backwards and can change everything I need within there, change to the way that we want it to look. But this is not a big business, right? And they can't afford to bring in a programmer or whoever it might be that, you've got to pay them a couple of $100,000 to do that. We actually outsourced that. But the beauty of it was we were able to outsource it to a different country. So in this case, it was the Philippines, and it was at a really good price point. But because we were here to advise on, this is the changes that need to happen, and this is the way it needs to look at the end of those changes, and these are the reports that need to come out, we're actually able to give it to a person in the Philippines who had no knowledge of that business, and they could execute what they needed to do because we gave them a very strict brief around what needed to be done. So the thinking for us is we need to think about, well, what are the other resources we can pull in at a cost point that's going to be acceptable for that business? And then the business's thought process needs to be, well, I don't necessarily need to hire everybody to get these things done. I can actually outsource pieces, provided that I've got a really strong scope and a strong plan that someone then in another country that might be in a different time zone can actually execute for me and get the outcome that I need.
I want to talk about something else that you raised before, about sort of the most common issue about bringing enough leads in, right? That's the big thing. And I hear that talked about all the time, and, I'm as guilty as the next small business in talking about those things. Just challenge you on that. How real is that? Is it that they're getting that lead process wrong and not enough coming in? Or is it that the delivery system and helping get more out of existing clients is where some of the obstacles might be? I
think it's actually both, Anthony. And it depends on the organisation. Sometimes it's the quality. We talk about marketing qualified leads, MQLs. Sometimes it's, I had an organisation last week that their qualifying process was zero from marketing. So an MQL went across unqualified into the sales pool, and sales actually had to go through and do the qualification. And that was just simply the way they did their online form was very, very basic. Give me your name and your phone number, we'll have a chat to you. So we redesigned all of that for them and said, no, you need to be asking a few more questions around the suitability of your product or service to that particular person or organisation that's coming in. And then you can qualify that in marketing so your sales professionals aren't out there ringing up people who actually didn't want the product at all. They just got confused and filled out an online form. So I find that really interesting because a lot of small businesses, even medium-sized businesses, just don't have that skill set to understand what is an MQL, what's an SQL, and how do you move it through that process. But there's also there's another piece around what I call the growth equation or the sales equation, and that is, quality versus activity. Quality times activity equals growth. Now, what do we mean by that? So the two things there is every activity you're doing needs to be quality. If it's not a quality activity that's driving to that outcome that you're after, then you're actually wasting your time. So what we do is we look at the center of the organisation and say, how do we improve the quality of whether it's the simple campaigns that we're pushing out there, how we engage with clients, what's our value proposition, what's our ideal customer profile, what does that look like? Are there different demographics we need to be looking at to push that through? Once you get that quality right, then it just comes down to activity. And if the person in that particular sales role is doing that activity that we need them to do with a quality set of tools, then they're going to grow, they're going to get the outcome. So I find that that's the key to the sales or growth equation.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard, depends on the size of the business, of course, because often it's the owner / CEO / director is the / salesperson as well as the marketing person.
Yes.
And so, the support they may have in the business may be more functional in terms of operations and EAs and the like. And so that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you've got someone who's wearing multiple hats and may not necessarily be their skill in those particular areas, but they're forced to do it. So, how easy is it to, even advise those people, let alone get some practical change that happens?
Yeah, they've got to be willing for it, Anthony. That's the key, right? If you're a growth individual and you're willing to grow your skill set and change things that you might have been doing for 15 years to get a better result, then you're going to work well with us. If you're really fixed in your mindset and fixed in your ways, it's going to be difficult. And we'd probably say up front, look, if you're not prepared to change the following things, I'm not sure we can deliver a lot of value to you, because if I don't deliver value to you, I don't want to charge you any money for something that you're not getting value out of. And I don't want you to say to somebody in the street, those guys didn't deliver us anything, right? We've got to be able to do that up front. So having someone that's willing to change, and also it's that capacity thing too. What you find with a lot of, small business owners, CEOs of medium-sized companies, they want to take everything on themselves, right? And they're doing so many different activities, the hats you mentioned, they're wearing all those things. When you actually then strip back their day and go, and this is more of a mentoring type of discussion that we start having then rather than, a sales discussion, it's, well, would you be better off moving that to this person here? Like, you've got resources over here. What does that person do? Okay, let's allocate that so we can free up 20% of your time so you can then effectively go and speak to the large clients that you've already got or the ones you want to get and have a really good quality conversation. Then we take them through, what does that conversation look like? So, have it with me right now. The points that resonate there to that particular person may not be what their client wants to hear. And that's what we help them in crafting the right value proposition to be able to present that in a manner that the client goes, okay, I'm now aware of what you're doing. I'm right in consideration now. I really understand. And having that also on your website so that people can research that. And I don't know if you know a lot of these statistics, Anthony, but most sales today, 70% of people's awareness, so finding about which person they want to go to, which organisation they want to go to, 70% of that is done before they even engage a salesperson. So when you go back 20 years, the internet was really quite small. People would have to make phone calls. They'd have to get 10 salespeople to come in and have a chat with them. Not today. Today, you've got 70% of that journey, that customer sales journey, has already happened before they engage you. So if your content that's in the public domain is not right, then they're not going to go 70% with you. They'll do that research and they'll move on to somebody else very, very quickly. So that's where those chats are quite important.
It's interesting because it's been a long time being one of my favourite expressions is you never know what you're missing by having poor communication. Yeah. And that's effectively what you're talking about there is that. And I mean, it's a big reason why I do the podcast thing with a lot of people and a lot of clients, because at the end of the day, that's going to provide authentic content for you and on a consistent basis to educate both your existing audience and your potential audience. And if people aren't regularly hearing from you, then, it's A, you're not in the conversation, but B, as you said, people are looking at it and they're seeing stuff that's old and they're going, well, there's not, they're not up with it. There's not attention to detail. And I think that's those psychological messages that are sent through. I mean, I found it really interesting that people don't spend the time in checking what their own things are online. I had a meeting yesterday with a company, and they actually sent me a link to view something, and there was one comment under this video which basically said they're like scammers, and I was like, well, I already had some doubts, but that's kind of confirmed it. So you've got to be aware of what's being said online, both of what you're saying and what other people might be saying as well, because that can completely transform, the ability of your business to succeed.
Oh, 100%. And you think about even what we're doing today, Anthony, a podcast that's come from an iPod, right? Which the iPod was brought out probably, 25 years ago, maybe less. These things just didn't exist, right? So you need to be shifting your mindset from the 20 years ago where your profile was the interactions you had with people were how people thought of you in business or in personal life. Today it's everywhere. And that's where, I say to my kids who are 18 and 20, like, just be really careful what you're posting up there, because that's going to live with you forever, right? It's in the cloud somewhere and it's not going anywhere. So, I think the same is with business today too. There's a record of what your engagement with people in the cloud somewhere. There's a record of what your website looked like 10 years ago. You need to have things up to date. And if you think about selling, let's use that dirty word, selling instead of growth. If you think about selling, 20 years ago, you'd send emails to people, right? And you'd pick up the phone and ring people. Now, an example, how many phone calls do you get a day from unknown numbers, right, that you don't answer? I get probably 10, and I just let them go through to my voicemail, and normally it's an app developer wanting to build something for me. And then emails is another really interesting one. A lot of people don't know that you actually can't send. If I don't have express or implied permission from you, I can't send you an email. It's actually illegal in Australia. Yet, how many emails do we get every day to our business address or our personal emails? I get 10, 20 emails a day. That stuff just goes into the junk file or gets deleted straight away. So to engage with prospects now, you really need to be engaging where they're looking every day from a business point of view. And that's places like LinkedIn. That really is today's prospecting paradise, right? It's like walking into remember when we used to have those old drink sessions, you'd walk in, you invite all your clients and prospects in, you'd have a drink, have a chat. It's exactly like that today, but you didn't in those sessions where you're having a face-to-face coffee chat. You didn't immediately pitch and go, hi, I'm Chris from Growth Team Advisory. I do all this stuff. I'd love to work with you, right? You never did that. You just chatted with them and you say, have you got a boat? How many kids have you got? Da-da-da. And then eventually, you'd swap business cards and you might follow up a couple of weeks later and go, maybe we should have a chat. Yeah, great, fantastic. LinkedIn's no different to that. Like if you immediately connect with somebody and then pitch to them, I mean, you can look this up on the web, right? Connect and pitch is a terrible thing to do because people immediately just go, oh, no thanks, and they delete it. Whereas if you built a rapport with someone, and we did the same thing, Anthony, when we met on LinkedIn, and we built up a bit of a rapport on that, and then we had a bit of a chat, found some common ground, and now we're doing a podcast. That's where it is today for you, the biggest prospecting field. I mean, there's 1 billion people on LinkedIn, and in Australia, there's 14 million people on LinkedIn. That's more than half the population. So it's a huge area.
It's a massive area, and I think, but it is an interesting space as well because there are two things that are making it difficult in that space, and one is the one that you just talked about, the amount of people that contact you and pitch, hello, here's buy my services. I mean, I get several of those a week, and it's almost like a cut and paste as well, and that people are doing it. So I don't know whether it works for them or not, but it certainly doesn't work. It certainly work with me. And the other part that I think is a really interesting trend is AI. Again, you and I met through LinkedIn because we had real interactions, but that's the point where you can benefit by getting some cut through by demonstrating that you're a real person. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true, because the volume of AI generated not only content but comments on LinkedIn is huge, and so that gives you the option of standing. It's a bit like customer service, right?
Yeah.
There are so many fully automated processes these days that if you actually offer customer service, you stand out. And I think that's the important thing, that authenticity. Again, it's the reason why I love the podcasting platform, is because there's no denying the authenticity and the realness of the conversation.
Yeah, look, we're not artificially generated, which is good. So I agree with you. The podcasts are fantastic. And it is really, I think I told this one to you last time we caught up, but I love these, app developers that send you something on LinkedIn saying, we're an app developer, can I build you an app? And I respond back to them, can you build me an app to stop app developers contacting me on LinkedIn? And they come back, two of them came back and said, yes, I can. And I'm like, can you look up irony in the dictionary? Like, seriously? But that was probably AI generated, all of that, right? So it doesn't have the ability to work it out. And that's another topic. This is probably a topic for another conversation, is AI in sales. Like, there's all this talk about there's these great products we're bringing out now that we can click onto your LinkedIn and we can click it onto this and it'll generate all this content for you and stuff. But in the end of the day, what you said so right, it's about being real and present. That's what makes a difference in the relationship. It's not just a really fancy AI email that goes out to someone every month reminding them of where you are. It's that reality of being here, whether it's on the screen or in person, and engaging and forming a relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's the key, isn't it? It's the relationships that we build that make such a difference, and that willingness to be there and to spend some time with it. I think, as you said, in the old days it was rocking up at something and having a whole lot of people together and having a drink together or whatever it might be, and people have lost sight of that and putting the time in. And as I said, I find it alarming the way a lot of people behave on LinkedIn. And I've called out a few people that I know because the responses that they've given to me to post not only don't make sense, but they can be a negative for their business because of what's happening. And the thing is that if you're not monitoring it, then you're allowing, whether it's an AI or someone else that's acting on your behalf, to put messages out there that aren't helping your brand and in fact potentially having a negative impact on them. And I think it's an important part of getting that right, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You've got to, you want to craft your own messages, and things like these podcasts are brilliant because you can actually convey it so much in 20, 25 minutes of a podcast than you could in a written article. And no one will read, 3 pages of an article on LinkedIn. Unless it's, I don't know, somebody that's got an airline called Virgin is writing that, you might read it, but otherwise you probably won't, right? But yeah, I think you got to be so careful about that. But also too, I think with LinkedIn, it doesn't always have to be 100% business either. I do, every couple of weeks I'll do a warning Sunday post, Sunday social post, and I'll put up something like, an old car that I happen to own, right, in my garage, and I've driven it with my son on the weekend and it was a blast. So I'll put that up, or I'll put that I went fishing with one of my mates and caught 5 flatheads. Part of that's about being real and being a person. And when people see that content, I get so much more reaction on those social ones. I did one the other week of just a bottle of wine that I'd found downstairs that I didn't even know I had, and it was 20-something years old. Drank it with my wife and a friend, and it was superb, right? And all these people go, I've drunk that wine, that's fantastic. And you just get this stack of engagement on it. So it's not always about that business piece. It's about being real and being personal that people engage with as well.
Yeah, and I found that really interesting as well. But I mean, Facebook particularly is gets a lot more reaction for those kind of posts. You still can have business conversations, But if I post something about my dogs, I'm going to get a much greater response than anything else I could possibly post. And fair enough too; they're great dogs.
Yeah.
But look, I wanted to just go back to that principle of the lead generation, because outside of LinkedIn, what is it that businesses need to be doing at the moment? Because it is a problem, isn't it? That knowing where to go for leads. People are always looking for that gold ticket, which I don't believe actually exists. I mean, from a marketing perspective, the truth is that all of the activities that you do, whether it's the old-fashioned letterbox drop right through to LinkedIn, the response rate is not grossly dissimilar.
Yeah, look, if you have, with LinkedIn in particular, right, if you have a methodology that you're using and a process that you follow, you will get much better results. So one of the things that my firm does is we do a LinkedIn social selling course. It uses LinkedIn, it uses X, which used to be Twitter, and it teaches people how to engage on that. And it's very interesting that once we put people through that program, which is the 12-week program, they come out and they normally get 10 calls like this, 10 calls on Zoom or whatever per week from certain activities that they do. Now, those calls don't result in sales, right? You never get a sale first up, or very rarely. But what it does is that actually you're just building your network. The whole idea of it is to build your network with people that are like-minded, want to be successful in business and want to engage. If you can do that, you mightn't get any business from that person for 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, but at some point in time, they're following you, they know what you do, and they go, oh, hey, Chris does that. I might give him a call, and they contact you, and away you go. And so for me, it's just about having, and those 10 meetings are really about, when I do them, I just want to find out what the person does. And then what you're hoping, and it's a bit like that cocktail party again, right? You sort of ask, what do you do, Anthony? You take me through, I do podcasts. And then at some point in time, you'll go, what do you do, Chris? Oh, this is what I do. And that sticks in the mind, and they go, well, I might be able to use that service down the track. And then eventually something will come of it. If it doesn't, you've got a great network that's actually liking your posts, following you, and getting you more and more exposure across LinkedIn.
Yeah, and it's why it's so much more important to have those real conversations than just your standard networking style pitch, because it's what you remember are the stories that go around it, not necessarily the detail of what you do. And I think that's an important thing, right? It's you want to be memorable, and you want to be memorable because you feel an emotional attachment of some description to the other person. Yeah. And that's what, the amount of times where you meet someone and go, yeah, I'm an accountant. Okay, well, that's not memorable at all, right? So, that's the challenge is freeing yourself up to be able to have those meaningful conversations and trade a few stories and find that commonality, because that's also where you're going to be memorable, because you have some common threads, whether it's, as you say, whether it's about, we talked about when you and I met the first time, we traded a few stories about kids and kids of similar-ish ages, right? And that, has built a bit of a link between us as a starting point for where future conversations go. And I think that's what's important, is establishing that with individuals, which you can't do by giving a 30-second elevator pitch.
Yeah, 100%. I was doing I do a little bit of work with Western Sydney University. It's not paid or anything, but I did a mentor program with some of the students that were getting close to graduation from marketing and sales and business courses. And you sit down, they sort of go through some presentations and things, and then you sit down with a group of 5 or 6 of them, and you do that 2 or 3 times during the afternoon with different groups, and you just let them ask you questions, right? And the second group, I had this 5 group, and this one person said to me, I'm not doing too well in job interviews. I'm struggling to, get people to want to employ me. Like, what do I need to do? And I said to this person, mate, you've just got to become an epic storyteller. I said, what do you mean? I said, you've got to just be able to tell really good stories that capture people, their attention, but also their emotion. And I said, just tell me a bit about what you've done in your life. Anyway, so they rattled off all this stuff that they'd been doing, and they coached soccer teams, and they played high-level soccer right through school and through university as well. And I said, that's fantastic. So you got a really good story around teamwork. Tell me something like, have you been in a couple of grand finals? Yeah, tell me what happened in one of those grand finals. Anyway, long story short, this person had this fabulous story about, they're at halftime, they're down by 2 goals, they don't look like they're ever going to win. And he just kind of came out with that almost Ron Barassi conversation about just do something. Like when you're on the field, just go and do something. Like don't just run around, have a goal, go for the goal, do something. Anyway, I had this great talk to them. Well, they ended up winning 3-1. Might have been a penalty shootout, I'm not sure at the end of it. But they won 3-1. So the story was a great story. And I said, mate, next time you do an interview and someone asks you a question, try to work out how you can weave a quick version of that story in there, which just tells them you're a good leader, you're a good communicator, and that's what you're going to bring to the organisation.
Yeah, and I think it's just so powerful, isn't it? I mean, clearly you remembered it because you've just retold it, right? And that's I think is the true sign of it is that if you find yourself retelling stories from other people, that's when you kind of want to go back to them and go, did you you actually left an impression on me in a positive way, and I've remembered this story. And I think that's an important element of it. I just wanted to, before we sort of start wrapping things up, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, because I always find these stories particularly fascinating. Is tell me a little bit about, where you were, high school. What was the dream of wanting to become? Because I know I've read of where and I'm sure you're going to tell me the story in a minute about where your first job was. But what was the dream when you started out?
I actually wanted to be a musician when I started. I played in a lot of bands when I was in high school, and I thought we were going to be the next sort of U2, so we'd go out and do that. But that was not realistic and probably never going to happen, and it didn't happen. So I actually just started working in the Commonwealth Bank. That was my first job, and what I was doing in the Commonwealth Bank was putting checks into a machine that read the microencoding at the bottom of them, and then you just had to make sure that it all balanced. Little did I know that was going to lead me into working for a bank called Chase A&P Bank, which happened around deregulation. And then I worked for ABN AMRO, which was a merchant bank. And I started off financing cars and then moved to trucks and then moved to planes and ships and things. Then I ended up leaving there and I went to India and started a finance company in India for one of my mates, which was a bit of fun. And then came back and just did a whole bunch of other senior management roles that eventually got me to my last role, which was Chief Growth Officer of Findex, which is the 5th biggest professional services organisation in Australia and New Zealand. So you never know where your journey's going to start, or you never know where it's going to end either. So I'm not sure if that's a story you're after, though.
No. I'm fascinated as well that where the entrepreneurship and the like came from. I mean, is that something that comes down from your parents in any way? And because that's the trajectory that you've gone on, and obviously out on your own these days.
Yeah, I think, my dad was a chemical engineer and he ended up being 2IC of Rexona in Australia. And, so he started from pretty humble sort of beginnings. I think I probably learned that discipline and tenaciousness from my father. But then the gentler side of things really came from my mum, because she was always just the person you could go to whenever there was a problem. She'd listen to you and she'd be very sensible and, don't get too worked up about it, Chris. But I think probably the greatest thing my dad ever said to me was I was having a bit of not an altercation, but I was just being a bit of a smart ass with my sister at a family barbecue or something. And it was because we had a difference of something or other. And my dad just said to me, he said, Chris, sometimes you've got to celebrate the differences in life and not be critical of them. And I sort of sat back and went, that's all he said to me. And I just sat back and went, oh, I've got to think about that. And I still think about that today. I hear his voice in the back of my head saying that. And, I tell my kids the same thing. Don't be critical of things that are different in life. You've got to celebrate it, because that's the beauty of, us all being individuals, is that we're all different and our stories are all different. And it's just so great to be able to experience that different differentiation and appreciate it, rather than going, oh, why's that person different from me? That doesn't make sense. Enjoy it and enjoy the differences.
I love that. And isn't it great how we've got these little things that stick back in our minds? And I don't know, have you talked to your father about it since that first time that he spoke about it? Did he know how memorable that was?
Yeah, look, unfortunately my dad passed away about 11 years ago, but I did get to spend probably 6 or 7 hours with him the day before he did pass away. And it was the middle of the night. I got a call from the hospital saying, look, your dad's woken up. Can you come in and see him? Because he'd been taken to hospital the evening before. So I sort of got up at 2 a.m. and went, okay. So I went into the Sound Hospital at Wahroonga and sat down with him, and he said, you've got to get your mother in. I need to see your mother. And I said, mate, it's 2 a.m. Come on. Just hang in there. You just keep yourself going till 6 o'clock, and then I'll ring up my brother and I'll ring up my sisters and I'll ring up mum, and they'll all come up and see you. But during that period of time, I'm just sitting there and chatting with him for 4 or 5 hours, went through all that sort of stuff. And I did get a chance to say to him all the stuff that you want to say, like you love him and all that sort of stuff, right? But also I got to say to him, you remember that barbecue at my sister's place? Yeah. You said that to me? That's still in there, mate. And he's just going, really? So I don't even remember that. It's true, and it's in there.
It's amazing those little gems that stick in from people, and how they formulate a difference. And I've certainly got I'm sure we all do when we sit and think about it, that we've got little gems from family, whether it's parents or grandparents, that just stick with you, and they may have been offhanded comments at the time that they never thought about, necessarily verbalizing before or since.
Yeah.
I don't think you can be too premeditated with some of those things. I've heard some classic quotes over the years and thought, gee, why can't I craft something better that I'm going to impart on my children and make it memorable? But it doesn't really work that way.
No, I've always thought that your job as a parent is to create those memories for your kids, so that they've got fantastic memories of their childhood. They've got fantastic memories of you when you're no longer here. And that's that's what you're pointing out there. I mean, I think my parents did a great job of that, and hopefully I've done a reasonable job with my kids in creating some good memories for them as well.
I'm sure you have. Now, I want to wrap up with a question that I try to ask most of my guests in some way, shape or form, because you're talking about memorable moments. And I think what are the memorable moments that your clients have that you wish future clients would know in advance that they're going to have?
That's a great question. I'd say, Anthony, it's that moment when they realise that if they can make the changes that we're recommending that they do, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. They are going to grow. They are going to get that success they're looking for. When you see that light bulb come on in somebody's head, the metaphoric light bulb, that's the most enjoyable part of doing this, because you just want to, we're really here to help. That's the whole purpose of it. And when you see someone go, oh man, that's simple, but it's really effective. I would never have thought of that. That's the buzz I get. And then the other buzz I get too is when you run into them 3 or 4 years later, and this is more about people that have worked for me in the past, probably now, you run into them in a pub or something like that, and they turn around and go, that time that happened? I moved on from that, and I actually now am doing this, and that's because of you. And I'm like, oh, get out, it's not because of me. They go, yeah, seriously. I've had a guy the other day he got a new job. It was on LinkedIn again, right? And I put a little comment in going, hey, mate, congratulations. I always knew you were going to be a superstar. And his comment was, well, that's only because I worked for you 10 years ago, mate. And you just sort of think, wow, I don't sort of think of that when I'm doing those things, but that's the joy you kind of get. And it's the same with clients too, when you can go back to a client a couple of years later and look at the plan that you helped craft with them and look at the execution they've done. And you might have done, a 6-month check-in. I'll sometimes do with them and sort of, how are you going with that? Do we need to pivot a little bit? And then you see that in 3 years' time, and the business is 3 times the size of what it was, and they're employing all these people, and they're not having to make people redundant and things like that. That's just gold, absolute gold.
Yeah, I love that. I love seeing that that growth, and I've had similar experiences, and it's just nice to see that you've had some kind of an impact on people. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all of those things. What we're going to do, of course, is, as you alluded to a little bit earlier on, you've got a 12-week program, which is probably a good way of people engaging with you early on. You just want to tell people quickly about that, and we're going to include some details in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, sure. So, look, it's a social selling program. It's actually a certified course from the Institute of Sales Professionals from the UK. It takes you through 12 weeks. There's 6 modules which help you to craft your profile better, have better engagement with people, think about the content you're doing, how do you connect with people, how do you create that relationship to then earn the right for them to ask you what you do. So taking them all through that. And then every second week we do a one-on-one, where it's a one-on-one coaching session with me or one of my team. and we just go through, like, what did you do last week? How did that work? And a lot of the times too, they're like, I sent out these invites. No one accepted them. Well, tell me what the invite said. When they tell you, you sort of, no, you can't sell in that invite. You've got to do this. So it's that one-on-one coaching that goes for 6 weeks as well, over that 12 weeks. And then at the end of it, if you want to continue doing coaching, we're more than happy to come in and do that for you. But it's a simple course. It works for, we do courses with larger companies where we'll have 10 of their salespeople come on the course. But we also do public courses where if you're a small business and you want to attend that, we'll put you in a virtual room with maybe 5 other companies. And that also helps you do a bit of networking because you're going through that course together, and you might find some synergies where you can help each other.
Yeah, I love that. It definitely happens. I know I've done that myself, where you've gone for an intention of really learning from your own perspective, and suddenly you end up with a couple of clients because you've shared a journey together. So it's always a nice thing to be able to build those relationships over a period of time, which I guess is to the point of what we've spoken about a lot in the conversation. Chris, thank you so much for being an amazing guest. We've covered a lot of territory, and we're, as I said, we're going to include lots of information in the show notes on how people can get in touch with you,
right,
and find out more about all of your programs, the advisory program, of course, the 12-week program as well.
Anthony, thanks so much. We've really enjoyed our time today. Cheers, mate.